Most of us have been searching a long time for a better future than the reality that we're living in right now. And having myself sailed the Atlantic solo several times, I have a strong communion with one of the co-producers of the film that we'll be talking about in this interview. His name is Andrew Cameron Bailey, and along with Connie Baxter Marlowe, has produced a film that's, to put it mildly, the most important film most of us may see in our lifetime. The name of the film is In Search of the Future. And as we are in a time of great crisis in our world, I can't think of a more appropriate topic. So Andrew, would you tell us about your role in bringing this film to people here?
My role in bringing the film? I've been a wannabe filmmaker since I was 24 years old, growing up in South Africa. Ended up with a 39-foot Buchanan motor sailor, and it didn't belong to me, but this boat, and a Bolex H16 reflex movie camera, and aqualungs and underwater housings and so on, a whole adventure that I had planned for years. It didn't happen. Ended up leaving South Africa. That whole thing fell apart for reasons beyond my control, and moved to America. On my way to America, I met a man named Ralph Abraham, who is a very significant figure in the film. Major mathematician, one of the fathers of chaos theory, and also at the center, very much at the center of the Santa Cruz, California consciousness expansion phenomenon that was going on in the late 60s and the early 70s. I met him the night before I left to fly to Italy to pick up the sailboat that I crossed the Atlantic on, Chitana 4, and then spent 2 months on that boat. Did a 15-day crossing, but we spent 2 months on the boat. The skipper was waiting for a baby to be born and so on. But anyway, found myself in America. I was being attracted to California. I just knew that something was going on the planet at that time, and it seemed to be coming out of California. Got to California.
We call that the left coast here.
The left coast, fine. Found myself on the left coast with an extraordinary group of thinkers, philosophers, cosmologists, hippies, just people who were breaking the mold at that time. You know, the Vietnam War was in full swing, and there was an entire group of us who began to feel that the world was about to change and that we were an important part of that change. So the seeds of this film were born back then in probably 1970. Fast forward to the future, fast forward to the present, I guess we better, should we
take a stop at there?
Should we go straight to the future? No. To the future of 1970, bringing us up to about 2003, I had been working with a nonprofit, developing a nonprofit organization around the Bushmen of the Kalahari, and loved them and found them to have a wisdom, a sort of gentle, nonverbal wisdom. We don't even speak the same language, so it's not about analytical, mental, philosophical activity. It's more about just way of being, What's it like to be with this person? And so when I met Connie in 2003 at the Omega Institute, this is what I had. Ralph Abraham had become a major mentor of mine, and he had introduced me directly and indirectly to a lot of the major movers and shakers and thinkers, Esalen Institute, back in California in those early 70s. And I'd stuck with that and ended up, not with Rumi because he was no longer around, but I did 35 years of Sufi inner work. I don't know that you knew that. A lot of inner work, and had married a lovely young woman, and we'd produced 5 kids who are now grown up and all doing really well. So that whole householder, parent phenomenon. And then suddenly, 2003, I meet a fellow filmmaker with a very compatible vision. And it was at that point I was finally able to cease to be a wannabe filmmaker and become a filmmaker. This is my first film. So thanks for what you said about it, because for a first film it's pretty amazing to have this kind of response coming from, you're not the only one who feels this way.
And Connie, you have been a filmmaker. You were a filmmaker before you and Andrew met. Would you tell us a little bit about your previous films?
Well, I've been a photographer most of my life, and I'm basically a champion of ideas. And film is a great way to communicate ideas. And I had made a film series on Henry David Thoreau and little-known aspects of his life that involved his epiphany on Mount Katahdin, as well as his involvement with the Native Americans most of his life, that he was one of the top ethnologists of our time, because he was a mystic, and he saw an expanded reality, and he saw that the Native people saw what he could see, and he spent his life trying to find out what they were like before contact with the white man. And he came to Maine several times to hire Indian guides so he could study their ways. And I've done a film series, a 5-part film series that features Arnie Neptune, Penobscot elder, and a couple of other Penobscot elders, and a top visionary Thoreau scholar, and bring forth a tapestry of ideas around those experiences in his life.
You have a particular connection to Mount Katahdin and Baxter State Park. Tell us about that.
Well, indeed. Percy Baxter was my Uncle Percy. He was my great-grand-uncle, and he had a vision that Mount Katahdin was to be preserved for future generations, and spent his life, or the last part of his life, preserving 200,000 acres to give to the people of Maine, whom he loved, to be held forever wild as a park. And I believe that it's all tied into the sacred nature of Mount Katahdin, that he was actually given a directive by the energies on the planet that this was his role, and he took it on and gave a great gift to the future generations of Maine.
And indeed it is. I've climbed Mount Katahdin myself and have felt that great spirit of the mountain.
Well, it's been the sacred mountain of the Wabanaki Indians forever. They understand its sacred nature. So, and Thoreau had this major experience on it. So that's a perspective that isn't understood or known at this point. So I'm happy to share that. And this film brings forth a similar idea of what I was driving at in that film series, and that is the role of the indigenous people, what they're carrying for the future of humanity. Because as a Baxter, my mandate from my family was make the world a better place. Put your life on the line, put your career on the line, whatever it is. If you have a vision, live it and be it and do it. And so that's what Andrew and I coming together and creating this film has been beyond my wildest dreams of creating something that could very well make a difference.
As I come from Brooksville on the Blue Hill Peninsula, I'm going to couch this in the words of our wonderful resident Rob McCall, who writes a column and speaks on WERU Community Radio about the Amananjo Almanac. That Amananjo is Blue Hill. It means small misty mountain. And Rob speaks of breaking down, the need to break down the wall of hostility between man and nature. Your film addresses this through the eyes of the wise ones, the indigenous people. So would you both speak to that, please? Tell us.
Isn't that the most
means.
absurd concept anybody's ever heard, the wall of hostility between man and nature?
It's kind of like slapping yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, right.